alluded to by the chairman, the absence of a proper enforcement agency, whether or not it's going to be with SHRAJ or whether we're going to have an information commissioner. Obviously, giving it to SHRAJ will make the bill, in our view, stillborn, because SHRAJ already has enough on its plate. So giving it to SHRAJ will be basically to condemn the bill to the fate of our whistleblower statute, which has not been as effective as it should. And of course, the number of delays that are permitted by the current version of the bill. Also, there's no guarantee that passing this bill will lead to a sea change in the relationship between the rulers and the ruled in Ghana. Because we have a history of passing really good laws. We love to pass procurement law, but our procurement law has some deficits that that can be addressed. We like to talk about our whistleblowers law, but I'm not aware of anybody who has. And it shows clearly that even by African standards, Ghanaians are not especially good at going to their leaders and asking them questions. So for this bill to work, it will really have to be accompanied by a lot of public education. Otherwise, the law will be there, the ability to basically request for information from government will be there, but no one will be taking advantage of it. The research shows that ordinary Ghanaians are much more likely to go to their pastors than to go to their public officials when they have issues. It's a problem if you are trying to run a democracy. You want greater, a democracy in which one has more social and political accountability. But there is hope. There is one avenue that has not been explored sufficiently, and I suspect it will be explored a lot more going forward. It is a bit of a misnomer to say that we don't have access to information rights. We do. It's in the Constitution. It's clearly stated Article 5.21(1)(f) that this is a right that has been granted to the people of Ghana as a fundamental human right, subject to such qualifications and laws as an integrated democratic society. Now, this is a Chapter 5 right, which means that any one of us in this room, any CSO, any individual, any media house, can go to the High Court and have the rights enforced under the Article 33 provisions at the Human Rights Court if you're in Accra, or at the High Court if you are outside of Accra. Now, we have not taken advantage of this provision yet, and by we, I mean the general public, not lawyers and CSOs. We have not taken advantage of this provision yet out of deference to the process. We are waiting for an access to information law to pass before you basically start bringing actions in this area. But in the absence of an access to information law, we can still have access to information, essentially by going to court to enforce this right. This would mean, of course, that for every piece of information that a citizen wants, that demands or feels should be made available to him, a High Court judge, a Human Rights Court judge, would essentially be the person who decides whether or not the citizen deserves to have that right, to have that information, whether or not it's appropriate for a citizen to have that information according to the standard that has been set by the Constitution, according to what's expected in a democratic society. That is the key test, and that is the test that should guide the courts when there's an attempt to enforce this right, and that is also the test that should guide Parliament when it is engaged in the process of passing an access to information law. Because if we pass a law that does not meet this test, that has, for example, extremely broad exemptions that are not exemptions that you would not expect to see in a democratic society, or exemptions that are not necessary for a democratic society, then whatever law we pass, it will essentially be unconstitutional. And it would be a shame to pass an access to information law that by failing to meet this test is essentially still born of being unconstitutional. The law we passed on Tuesday, and people on Thursday at the Supreme Court challenging certain provisions in the law, and it's happened in other countries. For example, in Uganda, which has similar provisions to ours, one of the strategies that they used to get an access to information law passed was to based on their constitutional right to access to information that's in their constitution. Now, it somewhat backfired, but what eventually happened was that the government of Uganda ended up passing an access to information law that was more of a denial of information law than an access to information law. It was full of exemptions. The law was about 2/3 exemptions and 1/3 law. And we are somewhat in danger of doing that, but I think that this test can, this guideline can protect us in the event that we pass exemptions that are too broad. Let me just give one last example and close. For example, in the current version of the bill, all information that is under the Office of the President is exempt. That means that SADA, which is under the Office of the President, will be totally exempt from any access to information provisions that exist. I do not believe that that is the kind of exemption that will be acceptable in a democratic society. For a key governance institution or a key government institution such as SADA, or a key government project such as SADA, to be completely exempt from the access to information rights. So this provision should be our test, should be our guiding post, and we should keep it in mind as we go forward talking about this law.
Let me say that we are very privileged to have been joined by quite a number of people. Who is the president of the Ghana Journalists Association as well? Let's acknowledge his presence. Thank you. Then the much anticipated Nina Mensa is here. Nina is here. Please put that together for her. She is from CHRI, which, as I said, there were two committees. The paparazzi have blocked my view, but no problem. There are two committees, the communication and then I think it's subsidiary legislation, I'm not sure. Constitutional and legal affairs group. So we invited some of the members of parliament, and he's MP for Bekwai and also former DVLA boss. So it's a big man. Now again, as I said, because of cabinet on Thursday, the minister decided to come here first to change the program a bit. Victor has thankfully raised some of the things Nina would have raised in terms of the consent. So we still think he has enough and some of the things to raise. And I know you know our concerns already. And since your ministry has oversight over RTI, I want to welcome you to respond to some of the issues. Please put your hands together for Honorable Mahama Yarega.
Let me do what the Nigerians safely do. Hiding under the generic term, all protocol observed, taught by Professor Jonah in his political science class. I never had the privilege of being taught. Professors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Bernard, of course, is the only person within ministers to come and answer questions in Parliament. But I'm happy and delighted to be here because this is a matter that is so important to this government and to His Excellency the President. I'm sure I will not be dismissed if he is informed that I'm here on the right to information bill discussion. I have listened to Victor, who has really given us a real insight into some of the issues and the challenges that confront us in relation to the passage of the right to information bill. And I will just respond to a few issues, but then also add my own observations generally regarding the systems that we have put in place as a country for ensuring that information is freely available to our citizens. We make information freely available. I'm sure those of you who are lawyers know that. I mean, the whole process of litigation is based on adequate information being made available to all the parties who are litigating. And obviously, the decisions of the courts are also public records. I mean, nothing is confidential unless where they are holding a certain in camera. So when it comes to the administration of justice, I think that information is freely available at all levels in litigation and after litigation and etc. The law reports are published and etc. It's the same way with the legislature. I mean, before we said the order paper is made available, and so everybody has a copy, and it's public record. And when we adjourn, the deliberations are captured in the Hansard. That is also published, and it's also public record. And anybody who wants information about what discussions took place in Parliament verbatim can go to the Hansard, and you will get it. And all documents that are laid are also captured in the Hansard. So every piece of information that you want in relation to the legislature is also publicly available, except when we sit closed sittings. And the closed sittings, they are not very common. Usually the conditions of service of honorable members are involved, or some matters of discipline and the behavior of members are involved. And a few other instances that may be closed sittings. And most closed sittings don't intend to discuss matters that are really matters that ought to be public record that we are hiding, not at all. At the end of the day, whatever decisions are arrived at, beyond individual conduct of members and welfare issues, and I'm sure even here as a department, when we are meeting to discuss your welfare issues, I mean, for purpose of openness and frankness and etc., probably will do that behind closed doors. So that's it for Parliament. So I want to say that when it comes to whatever happens in Parliament, it is public record. I think the area that appears to be a little more closed is the executive arm of government. And I think that this whole right to information legislation pays more attention to the executive arm of government than any other department of government. And there again, there is already quite some elaborate structure for sharing information. Remember that the executive cannot do anything without parliamentary approval. The executive cannot do anything without parliamentary approval. And to get parliamentary approval, they must present the request to Parliament. And when they present the request to Parliament, the request will become public knowledge. That's something that people need to note. So at the beginning of the year, the President has to come to Parliament and tell parliamentarians what plans he has to improve the economy, to improve governance, to improve the administration of justice. I mean, not into detail because that's not really his domain. Even to improve the performance of the legislature itself, whatever support he can give. But essentially, the provision of social services, the improvement of the economy, infrastructure and everything, he has to come and publicly present that to Parliament. His finance minister would follow with a more elaborate and detailed program that covers almost every sector and request for approval. So how much is going to spend, which sectors, and etc. Everything is contained in the budget statement, which is presented to the President after the President's own address to the House, outlining broadly his vision. And even in the Constitution, there are provisions that require that, I think every 10 years or something, you come with a broader vision of what you intend to do for the country. And so those are also there. And subsequently, when you are in the process of implementing, you have the Auditor General. And by law, the Auditor General is enjoined to follow up and find out how you spend the money, whether you spent it through the right processes, and etc., and whether you are accounting properly for the money and all that. And when the Auditor General completes his work, even though for quite some time there was a lag in terms of the timing of the presentation of the reports, but recently I can see that the Auditor General is catching up in terms of speed. And I think we've already received the report for 2012. We've already received the report, the Auditor General's report for 2012. And that report also comes to Parliament. And once it's laid in Parliament and presented to us, it becomes public record. So everybody can have access to the Auditor General. Then public affairs is freely accessible or generally accessible to the public institutionally at certain points. I can understand why, for instance, the right person to give all the information regarding how you use the money is the Auditor General, because technically they have the competence to analyze the information and to interpret it properly and etc. So there are all those arrangements. And if you also take the various legislation that we passed, achieved, and etc. So that whole arrangement is there and needs to be noted. Now, the Right to Information Bill, in my opinion, builds on all these constitutional and legal arrangements for freely making information available. What, in my opinion, is most innovative is the ability to request for the information now and not necessarily wait till at the end of the year when there is a formal report, an institutional report to either Parliament or some other agency that is mandated to receive the report. And the second innovation, in my opinion, which is also being gradually dealt with, is the requirement that all agencies should prepare a manual of the information that is available there in terms of the activities of the organization, the policies, and etc., and make it readily available so that individuals can go to those organizations and just pick the information as already arranged for public consumption. That's the second, in my opinion, piece of very important innovation in terms of the legislation. And I said that that is partly being dealt with because most government agencies now are setting up websites. And of course, there are some who, when you go find out the website hasn't been updated for about a year now. But you will still find out that others are up and doing in terms of putting most of the information that they think the public should have access to on their websites and making life a little easier for everybody. There is still some challenge in that respect, and I think that as a government we are working on trying to get all agencies to constantly update their websites. We are working with the information officers of all agencies to maintain that pressure on them to continuously review and update the information on their website so that they can be as current as possible. So that is also being dealt with. But I believe that with the passage of the legislation, it becomes a legal obligation and probably will help all of us because we also want them to put all that information out there. I think that if we really structure our system well, having the right to information legislation and having the infrastructure laid out, will make having to travel to an agency several times just to get some simple information that should be readily available will be reduced. Where the bill is, Cabinet did consider the bill recently and approval, except that there was some minor change in the financial provisions of the bill. I mean, to not charge per se, but to collect some money from people and to use it to organize the information for them. And it is provided there that the money should be retained in the organization and then you use it to do that. But Cabinet thought that for all legislation that impose any charges or fees, the money goes into a consolidated fund and then you take it from there. And so there's no need to depart from that arrangement. And so it's been referred to, subject to that, the bill was approved, and so the Attorney General is trying to just Parliament. As you will know, when it gets to Parliament, everything is possible. I mean, also amendments can be introduced. I like the statement that ostensibly there is a bipartisan support for the bill. I'm hoping that I'll benefit from that bipartisan support when we are shepherding the bill through the various stages in the passage of the legislation. But I think also that, of course, there are provisions that try to deal with certain practical issues when it comes to governance. I mean, some of the exemptions that you find there, they may, in one way or the other, hinder speedy access to information. But in governance, sometimes the processes are such that you will want to time the release of information. I mean, for instance, when it comes to the activities of national security, when you are trailing somebody, you are monitoring somebody's activity because you suspect that he's in the process of planning to commit an offense and etc. You may not want some information to go out at a certain point because it will derail the whole process and that kind of thing. And sometimes in public, in decision-making processes, when you want people to be able to freely express themselves, you may not want the deliberations to be out there so that it is known who supported gay rights during the meeting and who did not support gay rights during the meeting, because he doesn't want people to think in a certain way about him or her. So the process of deliberating to take a decision is a process where, to really promote openness, frankness, you want to shield that process from, the prying eyes of everybody. As for the media, I'm not sure that there is that much in terms of fear of the media, because as for the media, whether you have a Right to Information Act or not, they always find a way of getting the information and to be out there. GDA report hasn't been put out, but the journalists tell us they have it, and they've been discussing excerpts of it, whether those are really excerpts of the report or not. But the media professionals, they have ways of gathering information, so I don't think it's that much a fear of the media. I think it's just that the process, there's commitment, trying to get it through the Attorney General and then into Parliament, and I believe that with some bipartisan support, we should be able to push the Right to Information legislation. There's some concern about the cost of the whole architecture. There's that concern, and I think that if there's any fear at all, it is the cost of putting together the information, of organizing the information, and of making that information readily available at whose expense. I mean, that's the issue. So beyond that, I don't think that there's really any fear, because I want to assure you that almost every information about governance is already out there. Because of the processes of decision making, for instance, before a document gets to cabinet for approval, former Minister for Energy is here, you will know that there will be a lot of stakeholder meetings and consultations, and in the end, whatever is coming to cabinet is already out there. Everybody has the information, and yours is just to give an official stamp of approval and take some hard decisions regarding options that are being presented to you, after which you will also have to pass it on to Parliament anyway for them to authorize you to execute. So that generally is what I would say. And then lastly, to comment on one exemption which Victor mentioned, which is something like SADA. I mean, the Office of the President is there, established by the Office of the President Act. But then also, several agencies by law are established, and the law makes them answerable directly to the President. Often that is meant to establish a certain level of importance. When you say the President himself directly oversees this initiative, that gives it a certain level of prominence and gives a certain level of attention. It doesn't mean that it is not subject to the level of open. There are also reporting requirements. And those reporting requirements, I think, for SADA include presenting a report that gets to Parliament ultimately. So even though you will find out that it is under the Office of the President, it still doesn't enable it to benefit from some of the protection that the exemption in the legislation seeks to give to the office of the president. So just to draw attention to that distinction. Otherwise, you are about to take a decision and you're looking for evidence that will point you in one direction or the other, even as a policymaker, and you just don't find it, and you don't have the benefit of time to be able to wait and go and do all the research before you take such a decision and to interpret that for policymakers. It just makes our work easier. So we are also part of the community. Yeah, thank you very much, and I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. So we appreciate your presence, your endorsement. We really wish you would have stayed for a few questions because this room has a lot of journalists and CSO people. You know, it will be a travesty to just let you go like that. So, with the permission of the chairman, I just want to make a quick comment or two before he leaves. As I said, it's going from cabinet meeting. There's a presentation about to be made which will give us more issues about where we are with the RTI. But I believe that having had two speeches, it's only fair to bring the mic around and take two quick comments. So just introduce yourself and say what you have to say. I have another mic here. Okay, come on.
I want to know when the bill left cabinet to the Ages department. And also, yesterday, Vitus Hazim was talking about the late president's funeral. Civil society organizations have been asking for a sort of details of the budget. They've been promising to give it. 1 year on, we are celebrating his death. We have no information about the money spent. And we are spending more to commemorate his 1 year. We are being told that these are also donations from private people. It seems like a cycle. So
you want to know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for those
It's almost rhetoric. Also, I'm not too sure that every information from the executive has to go through parliamentary approval. We've had the executive expend monies that have not been accounted for. There are even reports in the media now that you've overspent what was approved by Parliament, and yet we have no information to that effect. The last one has to do with one matter which I quite remember when the bill was with the joint committee in Parliament that came up strongly by civil society organizations, and that to do with chiefs. Whether you can access information from, for instance, the Utumfo, can you want to find out the royalty, how he's using the money and all that? I don't know whether in the current bill, whether you've included it or you're just waiting for Parliament to go through that motion.
On that last question, if Mina had presented first, there would have been more clarity. So, but this is not a press conference. But the chairman says we should ask you to answer. So,
This is public domain. But really critical information, for example, have all ministers declared their assets, and what did they actually declare if then no one knows? There are so many such critical areas that the public absolutely has no access to the information. And so to say that information is already available in the public domain is a bit misleading.
okay. So 3 questions, about 6 questions.
Cabinet to the Attorney General about 3 weeks ago, I think. 3 or 4 weeks ago. I don't know which sitting of cabinet, but after that we presented to
Something that most people have overlooked in the bill, which is the interpretation of minister. The interpretation of minister. In the bill, the interpretation of minister is the Minister for Justice and Attorney General, not the Minister for Information. So even though the Minister of Information has been pushing and pushing, the proper authority when it comes to the right to information bill is the Attorney General. You know, so this last level of it, we are hoping they will push it and get it to Parliament because they now have the blessings of cabinet.
Prof's funeral cost. That's the matter that I recall that after the funeral, the committee did provide some accounting in terms of how
much they spent and where the contributions were coming from. I believe the committee that members of did provide some indication as to the cost and etc. So if you follow that, you will get that information. The present process of remembering the late Prof, I think even in Parliament there was some discussion about what the cost would be, but I think that for things like that, it won't be long. I mean, after a week or two, the event will go by and we will all be asking what would the cost be. And at this stage, you may ask what's the budget looking like. But as for the cost, you will know after the event and where they got the money from to carry out the activities. And my brother's statement about whether or not it is the case that information is as truly accessible as I have indicated. Yeah, for all the institutional arrangements that I have mentioned, in fact, the information is available. What I said, and if you remember, I said that the innovation that the right information legislation will be introduced is the fact that you will get the information as the event occurs. But the system that we have now relate to information after the event. After the event, you will get the information. Sometimes because of institutional lapses and etc., it could be delayed and reasonable, but ultimately the information will be made available. That is, I think, where the innovation that this legislation introduced will help us deal with some problem, which is that you don't wait till the harm has been caused before you go and but even then, there's still some positive in that if indeed we do follow up and prosecute and enforce the requirements and the recommendations contained in the report of the Auditor General, you definitely will have people making sure that in the future they don't repeat those things. Because when there's no follow-up, there's no prosecution, then people